The glove wasn't supposed to matter, at least, not at first. But now, according to federal investigators, a single glove recovered near a quiet Arizona road may be visually linked to the individual seen in surveillance footage connected to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. This isn't a conclusion, it's not a resolution, and it's not forensic confirmation, at least not yet. But it is the first tangible detail that appears to connect physical evidence found near Nancy's home to the masked subject shown on camera. And that changes how investigators and the public are looking at this case, because until now, everything revolved around what was seen on video. Now, there's something that was physically recovered, and the story becomes far more complex from here. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old mother of three, was last seen at her home in Tucson, Arizona, on the night of January 31st. When she didn't respond the following morning, her family reported her missing around noon on February 1st. What initially appeared to be a concerning but unclear disappearance quickly escalated after authorities reviewed home surveillance footage. According to publicly released information, a doorbell camera recorded a masked individual outside Nancy's home during the early morning hours. The footage showed the person appearing to interact with, or possibly tamper with, the camera itself. Investigators described the individual as armed, though officials had been careful not to speculate beyond what is visible in the video. At the time, the footage raised more questions than answers. Who was this person? Why were they there? And was the appearance captured on camera directly connected to Nancy's disappearance? Those questions have remained central ever since. In the days following the initial search, investigators and volunteers canvassed areas near Nancy's home. During that process, approximately 16 gloves were reportedly collected in the surrounding area. Most of those gloves were later determined to be unrelated and were discarded. However, one glove stood out. According to an FBI spokesperson, a glove discovered in a field roughly 2 miles from Nancy's residence appears to visually match the gloves worn by the individual seen in the previously released surveillance footage. This detail is important, but also easy to misunderstand. The FBI has emphasized that this match is based on visual observation, not confirmed DNA analysis. In other words, investigators are saying the glove looks consistent with what appears in the video, not that forensic testing has already linked it definitively to the suspect. That distinction matters, because while the glove contained a DNA profile, final laboratory results are still pending. According to official statements, preliminary lab analysis on all collected gloves was completed on Saturday, February 14th. However, the FBI has clarified that these were only preliminary findings. The final forensic results are still being processed, and once completed will be run through a national database. This means investigators are still waiting to determine whether the DNA belongs to a known individual, whether it matches any existing profiles, or whether it introduces an entirely new person into the investigation. At the same time, authorities have been careful to address misinformation. Local officials previously stated that no glove was recovered inside Nancy's home or directly on her property, despite circulating reports suggesting otherwise. Instead, the glove described as a potential visual match was found off the roadway, some distance away. That location alone raises additional questions. Was it discarded intentionally? Was it lost? Or does it indicate movement away from the residence after the initial encounter? None of those questions have confirmed answers. Yet, in addition to the glove, investigators have publicly confirmed the presence of other forms of evidence at Nancy's home. According to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, DNA not belonging to Nancy or her close contacts was discovered at the residence. Officials have also stated that blood matching Nancy's DNA was found on the exterior porch area of the home. Authorities have not elaborated on how or when that blood appeared, and they have avoided drawing conclusions in public statements. Instead, they have emphasized that the investigation remains active and ongoing. This careful language reflects the complexity of the case and the fact that each piece of evidence must be analyzed in context, not isolation. As public attention grew, the FBI released additional details about the individual shown in the surveillance footage. According to the agency, the person is described as male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build. In the footage, the individual appears to be wearing a black Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack with a reported capacity of 25 liters. These details were derived from forensic analysis conducted by the FBI's Operational Technology Division. Officials have stated that the purpose of releasing these specifics is to help focus public tips, not to encourage speculation. And that distinction is critical. Because at this stage, investigators are still assembling a timeline. They are still correlating physical evidence with visual data. And they are still determining how, or if, all of these elements connect. Why a visual match matters more than it sounds. At first glance, the phrase appears to match might sound vague, and legally speaking it is. But in investigative work, visual consistency can be far more significant than many people realize. According to publicly available law enforcement practices, visual alignment between recovered items and surveillance footage often serves as a directional signal, not a final conclusion. It helps investigators decide where to focus time, resources, and forensic testing. In this case, the glove recovered near the roadway didn't just contain a DNA profile. It also shared observable characteristics with the gloves worn by the individual in the surveillance video. That combination is what elevated the glove from one of many collected items to a point of interest. Not proof, not confirmation, but a potential connective thread. And once that thread appears, everything else is examined more closely. How investigators likely evaluate this kind of evidence? When federal investigators encounter an item like this, they don't look at it in isolation. Instead, they ask a series of layered questions. Does the material type align with what's visible in the footage? Does the color, texture, or fit appear consistent under similar lighting conditions? Does the location where it was found logically fit within the suspected movement path of the individual? Only after those questions are considered does DNA testing become part of the equation. According to statements from the FBI, the glove's DNA profile is still undergoing final forensic processing and database comparison. That means investigators are currently operating in a transitional phase, where physical evidence exists, but its full implications have not yet been confirmed. This phase is often one of the most critical in long-term investigations, because it determines what comes next. Beyond the glove, authorities are evaluating a larger pattern of information. The surveillance footage, the timing of the camera interaction, the presence of unidentified DNA at the home, and the discovery of blood matching Nancy's DNA on the exterior porch area. Each element on its own raises questions. Together, they suggest a sequence of events that investigators are still working to reconstruct. Officials have not publicly stated whether they believe the events occurred in a single continuous timeline or across multiple moments. They have also avoided assigning intent or motive. That restraint is intentional because premature conclusions can compromise both accuracy and accountability. Why public tips suddenly matter more. Shortly after releasing additional details about the suspect's appearance, the FBI announced a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's recovery or an arrest. This isn't unusual, but the timing is notable. Reward announcements often coincide with moments when investigators believe the public may unknowingly hold a missing piece of information, a backpack that looked familiar, a person seen walking along a roadway, a glove discarded where it didn't belong. These are the kinds of details that rarely stand out on their own until investigators provide context. According to the FBI, the newly released physical description and equipment details are intended to help concentrate the public tips. In other words, they're narrowing the lens. What authorities are deliberately not sharing, just as important as what has been released, is what hasn't. Investigators have not publicly disclosed the exact DNA profile type recovered, whether the glove DNA matches the unidentified DNA found at the home, whether multiple individuals are being considered, or whether the individual seen on video is believed to be acting alone. This absence of detail is not an oversight. It's a protective measure. Holding back certain information allows investigators to verify tips, eliminate false leads, and preserve the integrity of future interviews or legal proceedings. And in high-profile cases, especially those involving public figures, that balance becomes even more critical. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has drawn national attention in part because she is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a longtime co-host of NBC's Today Show. However, law Enforcement agencies have been careful to emphasize that the investigation is being handled based on evidence, not media visibility. Public statements have consistently framed Nancy first as an individual, a mother, and a missing person, not as a connection to a public figure. That approach reflects an effort to maintain objectivity while navigating heightened public interest. Where the investigation stands right now. As of the most recent updates, the investigation remains open and active. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department continue to work jointly, coordinating forensic analysis, reviewing tips, and reassessing physical and digital evidence. The final DNA results from the glove are still pending, and until those results are confirmed and cross-checked, authorities are unlikely to make definitive statements about its role in the case. For now, the glove represents possibility, not certainty. But in investigations like this, possibility is often where answers begin. How timelines are built when evidence doesn't align perfectly. One of the most challenging aspects of investigations like this is that evidence rarely arrives in a clean, linear order. Instead, investigators work backward and forward at the same time. They analyze when the surveillance footage was recorded. They compare that timing with when Nancy was last seen. They look at where physical evidence was found, and just as importantly, where it was not found. A glove discovered 2 miles from the home doesn't automatically confirm a direction of travel, but it does introduce a geographic variable. It suggests movement. It suggests time passing, and it suggests that whatever happened may have extended beyond the immediate area of the residence. These are not conclusions. They are working hypotheses, and every hypothesis must survive forensic verification. Why unresolved evidence doesn't weaken a case? From the outside, waiting for test results can feel like stagnation, but in reality, this phase often strengthens an investigation. Unconfirmed DNA results, incomplete timelines, and partial visual matches allow investigators to rule things out just as effectively as they rule things in. If the DNA does not match any known profile, that narrows possibilities. If it does match an existing record, that creates a new investigative pathway. If it matches other unidentified DNA already recovered, that connects separate pieces of evidence into a single thread. Every outcome carries value. And that's why authorities are careful not to overstate what any single item, including the glove, represents at this moment. High-profile cases often attract intense public focus. That attention can help generate tips, but it can also introduce noise. Investigators must sort through large volumes of information, some of it well-intentioned but inaccurate. This is why officials repeatedly emphasize verified information and specific details, such as physical descriptions and equipment, rather than speculation. It's also why agencies caution against drawing connections that haven't been publicly confirmed. Public engagement is most useful when it's precise, calm, and grounded in what authorities have actually released. And at this stage, that balance matters more than ever. What waiting really means in an active investigation. While the public waits for updates, investigators are rarely idle. During this period, teams are typically reviewing historical data tied to similar cases, cross-referencing tips with forensic timelines, conducting internal reviews of evidence handling, preparing for potential next steps once lab results return. These steps don't generate headlines, but they shape outcomes, and they ensure that when new information is released, it's accurate, defensible, and responsible. That process can feel slow, but it's designed to prevent irreversible mistakes. One of the most important things to recognize is that investigations don't follow narratives. They follow facts. There is no predetermined conclusion here, no confirmed sequence, no publicly stated resolution. What exists instead is a developing picture, built piece by piece. The glove is part of that picture. The surveillance footage is part of it. The forensic analysis is part of it. But none of them, on their own, tell the full story. Where this leaves the case, and what comes next. Right now, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains open, active, and evolving. Federal and local authorities continue to analyze evidence, review tips, and wait for final forensic confirmations. The glove that appears to match the one seen in surveillance footage is not an answer, but it is a question that now demands careful attention. And as more information becomes verified, that question may either grow clearer or lead investigators in an entirely different direction. If you want to understand how that process works and what realistically happens next, that's where we'll continue.